Welcome to today's episode, where we explore one of history's most remarkable survival stories. Picture this: a winter night in 1096 in the prosperous German city of Worms. Inside their homes, Jewish families celebrate Sabbath, unaware that outside the city walls, thousands of crusaders are approaching. These are men who have taken up the cross to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim rule, but they have decided their holy mission should begin closer to home. Why travel thousands of miles to fight infidels, they ask, when there are unbelievers living among us? Within days, the community that has lived here for centuries will face a terrible choice: conversion or death. Some will choose martyrdom, taking their own lives rather than abandon their faith. Others will accept baptism, planning to return to Judaism when the danger passes. Most will die defending their families and their sacred scrolls. This scene repeats across the Rhineland in city after city. Yet somehow, incredibly, Jewish communities survive not just this catastrophe, but countless others over the next 4 centuries. They survive expulsions from England, France, and Spain. They survived the Black Death accusations when desperate Christians blamed them for poisoning wells. They survived forced conversions, book burnings, and systematic discrimination that bars them from most occupations and confines them to crowded quarters in cities across Europe. How did they do it? How does a people without an army, without political power, without even a homeland, maintain their identity and culture through centuries of persecution? How do they not just survive, but create periods of stunning intellectual and cultural achievement? How do merchants continue trading across a continent that sees them as outsiders? How do scholars preserve ancient wisdom while living in constant uncertainty? How do ordinary families raise children with hope when the future seems so precarious? The story of Jewish survival in the Middle Ages is not one of passive victimhood. It is a story of extraordinary resilience, strategic adaptation, and stubborn determination. It involves building networks that span continents, developing new ways of thinking about law and identity, creating culture and scholarship under impossible conditions, and sometimes making wrenching decisions about compromise and resistance. It is a story with heroes and villains, triumph and tragedy, and lessons that echo powerfully into our own time. Today, we embark on a journey through 1,000 years of medieval Jewish history. We will walk through the streets of thriving communities in Islamic Spain, flee with refugees escaping Crusader violence, sit in the yeshivas where young men debate ancient texts, stand in the courts where Jewish physicians treat Christian kings, and witness the heartbreaking expulsions that scatter families across the world. We will meet the scholars whose commentaries still guide millions, the merchants whose business letters reveal unexpected details of daily life, and the ordinary people whose names survive only in fragmentary records, but whose collective determination preserved a civilization. This is the story of how Jewish communities survived the Middle Ages. It begins not with destruction, but with promise. Chapter 1: The Foundation. The year is 800, and Charlemagne rules most of Western Europe. In his vast empire, Jewish merchants move freely along Roman roads that still connect distant cities. These merchants, known as Rhinelands, speak multiple languages and maintain trading networks stretching from France to China. They carry silk and spices from the east, slaves from Eastern Europe, and textiles from Byzantine workshops. Christian merchants cannot trade across both Christian and Islamic territories, but Jewish traders move between both worlds, welcomed in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Aachen alike. Emperor Charlemagne himself relies on them, recognizing that their international connections bring prosperity to his realm. In these early medieval centuries, Jewish communities occupy a unique space in European society. They are neither Christian nor pagan, but members of an ancient religion that Christianity itself emerged from. Church doctrine holds that Jews must be preserved as witnesses to Christian truth, even while their rejection of Jesus marks them as blind to salvation. This theological position, articulated by Augustine and reinforced by early medieval popes, creates a paradox that shapes Jewish life for centuries. Jews have the right to practice their religion, but they must remain visibly subordinate to Christians, a living reminder of the supposed triumph of the new faith over the old. The legal framework governing Jewish life traces back to Roman law, particularly the Theodosian Code, which grants Jews the right to practice their religion while restricting certain activities. Under Charlemagne and his successors, Jews receive official charters guaranteeing protection in exchange for taxes and services. These documents specify that Jews can own property, maintain synagogues, import and export goods, and settle disputes according to their own laws. The emperor's protection is not merely theoretical. When local bishops or populations threaten Jewish communities, royal authority intervenes, not from philosemitism but from practical recognition that Jewish merchants and tax revenues benefit the crown. Jewish communities settle primarily in cities along trade routes. In the Rhineland, communities flourish in Mainz, Worms, Speyer, and Cologne. These cities, later known by the acronym SHUM in Hebrew tradition, become centers of Jewish learning and commerce. In southern France, Narbonne hosts a significant Jewish population with traditions claiming descent from the ancient Judean aristocracy. In Italy, Jewish communities continue from Roman times in Rome itself, Lucca, and other cities. Each community organizes itself as a kehillah, a self-governing entity responsible for collecting taxes, administering justice in internal disputes, managing charitable assistance, and maintaining religious institutions. The kehillah structure represents Jewish adaptation to minority status. Unable to rely on state institutions for managing internal affairs, communities create their own. Each community elects or appoints leaders, establishes courts following Jewish law, operates schools for boys, maintains ritual baths and slaughterhouses meeting religious requirements, and organizes burial societies. This self-governance proves crucial for survival, allowing Jews to maintain religious practice and cultural continuity even when cut off from Jewish populations elsewhere. The autonomy also serves Christian rulers, who prefer dealing with identifiable Jewish leaders responsible for tax collection and maintaining order rather than managing Jewish affairs directly. Economically, early medieval Jews engage in diverse occupations. The stereotype of Jews as exclusively moneylenders is centuries away from emerging. In the Carolingian period, Jews work as merchants, artisans, farmers, vintners, physicians, and yes, some as moneylenders, but this is just one occupation among many. Jewish craftsmen produce textiles, work leather, and create ritual objects. Jewish farmers cultivate land they own or lease, particularly in southern France and parts of Italy. The international trading networks prove most distinctive. Jewish merchants maintain connections across vast distances through family ties, religious bonds, and shared language. A merchant in Lyon can send goods with a Jewish associate traveling to Alexandria, trusting that shared religious law and community pressure ensure honest dealing. This commercial success brings both opportunity and danger. Christian rulers value Jewish economic contributions, but also depend on them financially, creating a relationship of both protection and exploitation. The protection offered to Jewish communities is transactional rather than principled. Jews pay higher taxes than Christians, provide loans to rulers and nobles, and face special levies when royal treasuries run low. The king's Jews, as they are sometimes called, are literally considered royal property in some kingdoms, with their assets ultimately belonging to the crown. Religious and intellectual life flourishes in these centuries. Jewish scholars maintain academies in Babylonia, particularly in Sura and Pumbedita, where the Babylonian Talmud undergoes final redaction and commentary. European Jewish communities maintain contact with these academies, sending questions about religious law and receiving authoritative responsa written responses that guide practice. This network of scholarly exchange creates remarkable intellectual unity across vast distances. A question about business ethics raised in France receives an answer crafted in Baghdad, and that answer becomes authoritative for communities that may never have contact with the original questioner. In Islamic territories, Jewish communities experience what later scholars call a golden age. In Baghdad, under the Abbasid caliphs, Jewish scholars participate in translation movements bringing Greek philosophy and science into Arabic. Jewish physicians serve caliphs and nobles. Jewish poets write in Arabic, adopting and adapting Arabic literary forms while maintaining Hebrew religious poetry. The most significant development occurs in Spain, where Muslim conquest in 711 establishes Al-Andalus, a society where Jews find unprecedented opportunities. Under Islamic rule, while officially subordinate as dhimmi, protected people, Jews rise to positions of prominence impossible in Christian Europe. Jewish viziers advise Muslim rulers, Jewish generals command armies, and Jewish scholars contribute to an intellectual flowering that transforms medieval thought. Yet even in these relatively favorable centuries, shadows hint at future challenges. Popular Christian preachers occasionally stir mobs against Jewish communities, claiming Jews commit ritual murders or desecrate Christian sacred objects. Local rulers sometimes confiscate Jewish property or expel communities temporarily. The essential vulnerability of Jewish status remains clear. Protection depends on rulers, goodwill, and can evaporate instantly. But for now, in the year 900, Jewish communities across Europe and the Mediterranean maintain their traditions, raise their children, conduct business, and study sacred texts. They cannot imagine the catastrophes coming in the next 2 centuries. Catastrophes that will test their survival strategies to the breaking point and force adaptations that reshape Jewish identity fundamentally. The foundation is laid, but the structure built upon it will require every resource of faith, ingenuity, and sheer determination that the next generations can muster. Chapter 2. The First Crusade and the Rhineland Catastrophe. The message arrives in the Jewish communities of the Rhineland in spring 1096, carried by merchants returning from France. Pope Urban II has called for a holy war to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control, promising spiritual rewards and earthly plunder to those who take up the cross. Thousands of knights and nobles prepare to march east, but more worrying are reports of popular crusading armies gathering, composed not of disciplined warriors, but of peasants, minor nobles, and the desperate poor, led by charismatic preachers like Peter the Hermit. These armies speak not only of fighting Muslims in distant lands, but of taking revenge on unbelievers closer to home. The Jewish communities of Mainz, Worms, and Speyer have lived here for centuries. Their synagogues are substantial stone buildings. Their cemeteries contain generations of ancestors. They have charters from the emperor guaranteeing protection. Many Jewish families have business relationships with Christian neighbors spanning years. Surely, the leaders reason this crisis will pass as others have. The Bishop of Speyer has already promised protection. The community in Mainz sends messages to the emperor, requesting confirmation of their rights. Jewish families move their valuables to Christian neighbors for safekeeping, trusting in personal relationships to weather any temporary storm. On May 3, 1096, a crusading army reaches Speyer. The Jews take refuge in the bishop's castle. The bishop, true to his word, hides the Jews, and when the mob attacks, he disperses them with armed force, even executing some attackers as an example. 11 Jews are killed before order is restored. The community interprets this as confirmation that episcopal authority can protect them. Messengers ride to other communities with encouraging news. Seek refuge with the local bishop. Trust in the ancient protections. In Worms, the news from Speyer creates false confidence. The community is larger, wealthier, more established. When crusaders arrive on May 18th, Some Jews take refuge in the bishop's palace, while others remain in their homes, perhaps believing their Christian neighbors will protect them. They are wrong. The mob storms through the Jewish quarter, breaking into homes and dragging people into the streets. The Crusaders offer a stark choice: baptism or death. Some accept forced conversion. Others choose death, and the chronicles record acts of stunning religious devotion and terrible tragedy. Parents kill their own children rather than allow forced conversion, then take their own lives. Rabbi Simcha Cohen and his family choose martyrdom together. The aged scholar Meshulam ben Isaac slaughters his own sons at their request, declaring, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Even those who sought refuge in the bishop's palace are not safe. The bishop, either unwilling or unable to resist the mob's fury, abandons his protection. The Crusaders breach the palace. Over 800 Jews die in Worms. The synagogue is destroyed. Torah scrolls are burned or torn. The cemetery is desecrated. A Jewish community that traced its origins to Roman times is decimated in a single week. The catastrophe reaches its height in Mainz, the largest and most distinguished Jewish community in Germany. On May 25th, despite desperate attempts to secure protection, Crusaders breach the Archbishop's compound where Jews have taken refuge. What follows is described in harrowing detail in Hebrew chronicles written by survivors and witnesses. The Jews realize no rescue is coming. They gather in the courtyard of the Archbishop's palace and face their final moments. Some fight with whatever weapons they can find, killing a few Crusaders before being overwhelmed. Most choose ritual martyrdom, reciting prayers as they die. The Chronicle of Solomon Bar Simpson records scenes almost unbearable to read. Families huddle together. Fathers kill their wives and children, men themselves. Young brides ask their husbands to act as ritual slaughterers, making their deaths religiously correct. Women jump from windows rather than face forced conversion and likely rape. Children cry, "Shema Yisrael," "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one," as they die. Over 1,000 people perish in Mainz. The Crusaders loot homes, taking valuables intended to fund the Jews' own protection payments. They burn the synagogue. They desecrate the cemetery. The violence spreads to other Rhineland communities. In Cologne, Jews flee into the countryside, hiding in villages and castles. Crusaders hunt them down systematically over the following weeks. In Trier, the entire Jewish community accepts baptism under duress. The most later return to Judaism. In Regensburg, Jews are driven into the Danube for forced mass baptism. In Metz, in Prague, in other cities, variations of the same horror unfold. By the time the main crusading armies, led by nobles and better disciplined, move through the region weeks later, they find a landscape of destroyed Jewish communities. The First Crusade massacres of 1096 mark a watershed in medieval Jewish history. The scale of the violence shocks contemporaries. The response of Jewish communities reveals both the limits and the strengths of their survival strategies. The failure of episcopal protection shows that guarantees from authorities mean little when mob violence overwhelms them. The willingness of Christians to accept Jewish forced conversion reveals how easily religious coexistence can collapse. Yet, the Jewish response to catastrophe demonstrates remarkable spiritual resistance. The choice of martyrdom over conversion, documented in detail in Hebrew chronicles, creates a new model of Jewish sanctity. Previous generations of Jews had sometimes accepted temporary conversion under duress, planning to return to Judaism when safe. The Rhineland martyrs reject this compromise absolutely, choosing death instead. The chronicles written after the massacres serve multiple purposes. They record names of martyrs for communal memory. They provide models of behavior for future generations facing similar choices. They transform victims into heroes. They also ask difficult theological questions. How could God allow such suffering to his chosen people? Why did the righteous perish while some who accepted baptism survived? The answers offered emphasize divine testing, the special merit of martyrdom, and the incomprehensible nature of God's judgment. These texts, copied and read in Jewish communities for centuries, shape how later generations understand martyrdom and resistance. Survivors face immediate practical challenges. Some who accepted forced baptism under duress seek to return to Judaism, raising questions about their status. Church authorities insist that baptism, even coerced, is valid and irreversible. Jewish legal authorities struggle with how to respond. The powerful Rabbi Gershom of Mainz, who miraculously survived the massacre, decrees that forced converts who return to Judaism must be welcomed without stigma or shame, a ruling that helps rebuild shattered communities. The material reconstruction is equally daunting. Synagogues must be rebuilt, Torah scrolls rewritten, cemeteries reconsecrated, communal institutions reestablished. Financially, the communities are devastated. Much of the portable wealth of the Rhineland Jews was seized by crusaders. Property deeds and loan records were destroyed. Business networks were broken. Yet remarkably, within a generation, Jewish commercial activity resumes. Survivors reconnect with trading partners. New families move into the devastated cities. The kehillah institutions are rebuilt. By 1120, Jewish communities are functioning again in most Rhineland cities, though generally smaller and more vulnerable than before. The massacres permanently altered Jewish consciousness. Before 1096, European Jews might have believed that integration into Christian society was gradually progressing, that increasing commercial ties would create mutual dependence and safety. After 1096, illusions are shattered. Jews understand viscerally that they live in a Christian society that can turn murderously hostile with little warning. This recognition shapes strategies going forward. Communities invest more heavily in protection payments and political connections. They develop stronger internal solidarity, knowing they cannot depend on non-Jewish allies. They memorialize martyrs, ensuring future generations remember both the horror and the heroism. The First Crusade also marks the beginning of a new pattern. Subsequent crusades in 1146–47, 1189–90, and later see repeated anti-Jewish violence. Each call to fight Muslims overseas triggers violence against Jews in Europe. The pattern becomes so predictable that Jewish communities learn to expect it, preparing in advance by securing protection, hiding valuables, and even temporarily relocating. The Crusades normalize violence against Jews, creating an expectation that holy war against infidels naturally includes violence against the infidels within Christendom. Yet the communities survive. The dead are mourned, the destroyed is rebuilt. Life continues. This resilience in the face of catastrophe becomes a defining feature of medieval Jewish survival. Chapter 3. Scholars and Scrolls. In the northern French town of Troyes, a scholar sits in a cramped room, a goosequill pen in his hand, parchment before him. The year is 1090, 6 years before the Crusade massacres that will devastate nearby communities. His name is Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, known to history as Rashi, and he is creating a work that will influence Jewish study for 1,000 years. Before him lies a passage from the Talmud, that vast compilation of Jewish law and lore that forms the foundation of Rabbinic Judaism. The Talmudic text is famously difficult, written in a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic, filled with elliptical arguments, unexplained terms, and logical leaps that bewilder students. Rashi writes a commentary explaining each phrase, clarifying each argument, making the text accessible to students across generations and continents. Rashi represents one of the most important Jewish responses to medieval challenges, the preservation and transmission of intellectual tradition. Without a political homeland, without institutional power, without even the security of guaranteed protection, Jewish communities invest extraordinary resources in education and scholarship. This investment serves multiple purposes. It maintains religious practice across generations by ensuring people understand the complex legal system governing Jewish life. It creates communal prestige and identity, with scholarly achievement providing status that minority status in general society denies. It connects dispersed communities through shared texts and shared interpretive traditions. Most fundamentally, it ensures that even if communities are destroyed physically, the intellectual and spiritual heritage survives in texts and in minds that can recreate community elsewhere. The educational system that produces scholars like Rashi begins in early childhood. Jewish boys start formal education around age 5, learning to read Hebrew through the prayer book and Torah. By 7 or 8, they study Torah texts with commentaries, learning the stories and laws that form the foundation of Jewish identity. The most promising students continue to Talmud study in their early teens, learning the complex dialectical reasoning that characterizes rabbinic thought. This education is remarkably widespread for the medieval period. While Christian Europe generally restricts literacy to clergy and a small elite, Jewish communities achieve near universal male literacy. Even poor families ensure sons receive basic education. Communities subsidize education for orphans and poor children, recognizing that maintaining tradition requires educated participants. The most advanced students attend yeshivot, academies dedicated to intensive Talmud study. These institutions vary in size from a handful of students studying with a single master to larger establishments with multiple teachers and dozens of students. Students often travel significant distances to study with renowned scholars. A young man from Spain might journey to Provence or the Rhineland to study with a particular authority. These study journeys create personal connections between communities and spread interpretive traditions across regions. Students support themselves through a combination of family support, community subsidies, and sometimes their own labor. The commitment required is substantial. Talmud study is intellectually demanding, requiring mastery of enormous amounts of material, facility with complex reasoning, and often years of dedicated focus. The Talmud itself is a massive work, compiled in Babylonia around the 6th century. It consists of the Mishnah, a code of Jewish law compiled around 200 CE, surrounded by the Gemara, centuries of rabbinic discussion, debate, and elaboration. The final text rambles across topics, moving from legal discussions to folklore, from ethical maxims to medical advice, from scriptural interpretation to stories about famous rabbis. Its organization is associative rather than systematic, and its language assumes background knowledge that medieval students often lack. Hence the critical importance of commentators like Rashi, who provide the framework making Talmud study accessible. Rashi's commentary becomes so fundamental that within a generation of his death in 1105, virtually every Talmud manuscript copies his commentary alongside the original text. His grandsons continue his work, producing additional commentaries known as Tosafot editions that extend and sometimes challenge Rashi's interpretations. These scholars, known as the Tosafists, create a school of thought characterized by sophisticated analysis and creative problem-solving. They identify contradictions between different Talmudic passages, propose solutions, analyze the assumptions underlying rabbinic arguments, and extend legal principles to new situations. The Tosafist method becomes dominant in Northern European yeshivot and shapes Jewish legal thinking for centuries. While Rashi and the Tosafists work in northern France and Germany, a different intellectual tradition flourishes in Islamic Spain. Here, Jewish scholars engage not only with traditional Talmudic learning, but also with philosophy, science, and secular poetry. The towering figure of this tradition is Moses Maimonides, born in Cordoba in 1138. Maimonides' life exemplifies both the opportunities and dangers of medieval Jewish existence. His family flees Cordoba in 1148 when the fanatical Almohad dynasty conquers the city, demanding conversion to Islam or death. The family wanders through Spain and North Africa for years before settling in Egypt, where Maimonides becomes court physician to the Sultan. Maimonides produces works in multiple genres. His Mishneh Torah is a comprehensive code of Jewish law, organizing all legal material from the Talmud into a systematic format. Unlike the Talmud, which presents legal discussion without always clearly stating final rulings, Mishneh Torah provides definitive legal decisions organized by topic. The work is revolutionary in its ambition and controversial in its authority. Some scholars criticize Maimonides for presenting rulings without indicating his reasoning or the Talmudic sources for his decisions. Others embrace the work as making Jewish law accessible and usable. The controversy reveals an underlying tension in medieval Jewish intellectual life: how to balance preservation of traditional learning with the practical need for clear guidance. Maimonides' other major work, Guide for the Perplexed, addresses different concerns. Written in Arabic for educated readers, the guide attempts to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with Jewish theology. Maimonides argues that reason and revelation, properly understood, cannot contradict each other. He provides non-literal interpretations of biblical passages that seem to contradict philosophical truth, argues for a sophisticated understanding of God that avoids anthropomorphism, and addresses questions about providence, prophecy, and the purpose of religious law. The guide proves immensely influential, but also controversial. Some scholars embrace philosophical inquiry as enriching religious understanding. Others condemn philosophy as dangerous to faith, leading to heresy and atheism. The controversy over philosophy splits Jewish communities in southern France and Spain in the 13th century. In 1232, some French rabbis actually denounced Maimonides' philosophical works to Dominican friars, leading to the books being burned. The willingness of Jews to involve Christian authorities in internal disputes shocks many and leads to counter-denunciations. The controversy reveals deep divisions within Jewish communities about cultural engagement with surrounding society. Should Jews study secular philosophy, science, and literature? Does such study strengthen or weaken Jewish identity? The debate continues for generations without clear resolution, with different communities and different scholars taking various positions. The practical output of medieval Jewish scholarship is responsive literature. When communities or individuals face legal questions not clearly addressed in existing sources, they write to recognized scholars for guidance. The scholar analyzes the question using traditional interpretive methods, cites relevant sources, explains reasoning, and provides a ruling. These responsa accumulate over centuries, creating an ever-expanding body of applied Jewish law. They also provide invaluable historical information. A responsum about whether a specific business practice is permitted might reveal details about medieval commerce. A question about family relations might illuminate marriage customs, gender roles, or social tensions. The physical transmission of texts is itself remarkable. Each Torah scroll, each volume of Talmud, each copy of Maimonides or Rashi must be hand-copied by scribes. The work is painstaking and expensive. A complete Talmud manuscript might take a scribe a year or more to produce and cost more than an ordinary family could afford. Communities often own only a few copies of major works, kept in synagogues or yeshivot, and available for study, but not for private ownership. Wealthy individuals might commission manuscripts for personal use or as donations to study houses. The scarcity makes the intellectual achievement even more impressive. Despite limited access to books, despite communities spread across continents, despite persecution and disruption, Jewish scholars maintain remarkable continuity of learning. This intellectual tradition provides crucial resources for survival. When communities are destroyed and must be rebuilt, educated survivors carry the tradition in their memories and can reconstruct texts and institutions. When Jews migrate to new regions, they bring their learning, establishing new centers of study that maintain continuity with older ones. The shared textual tradition creates bonds across otherwise separate communities, providing a sense of participation in a larger whole despite physical dispersion. Most importantly, the tradition provides meaning and purpose, transforming suffering into a test of faith and learning itself into a form of worship. For a people who cannot defend themselves militarily and cannot rely on political protection, intellectual and spiritual resistance offers a form of survival that external persecution cannot destroy. The scholars in their study houses, debating fine points of law while their communities face existential threats, are not escaping reality. Chapter 4: Money, Trade, and Economic Survival. In a Frankfurt counting house in 1250, a Jewish merchant named Abraham ben Samuel reviews his account books. On one page, he records a loan of 50 marks to a local nobleman for purchasing armor and horses. On another, he notes the arrival of a shipment of pepper and cinnamon from Venice, purchased through a Jewish associate there. A third page lists debts owed by various Christian craftsmen for raw materials advanced on credit. Abraham's business is typical of successful Jewish merchants in this period, a combination of money lending, long-distance trade, and local commerce. His prosperity is real, but so is his vulnerability. The nobleman who borrowed 50 marks might refuse to repay, knowing Jewish creditors have limited legal recourse. The merchant guild might petition the city council to restrict Jewish trading privileges. A new bishop might impose additional taxes or demand forced loans. Economic success provides resources for protection payments and communal institutions, but it also makes Jewish communities visible targets for exploitation and resentment. The association of Jews with money lending is one of the most persistent and consequential stereotypes in medieval history. Like many stereotypes, it contains elements of truth shaped by selective perception and historical circumstances. Jews do become concentrated in money lending and related financial activities during the High Middle Ages, but this concentration results from restrictions rather than choice, from economic logic rather than cultural disposition. Understanding why Jews become moneylenders, what this means for Jewish economic survival, and how it affects Christian perceptions of Jews requires examining the complex intersection of religious law, economic change, and legal restrictions. In the early medieval period, as we have seen, Jews engage in diverse occupations. They farm land, craft goods, and trade extensively. Through the 11th and 12th centuries, however, multiple pressures narrowed Jewish economic options. The growth of merchant guilds in European cities excludes Jews from many trades. These guilds control production and sale of goods in their industries, and membership requires Christian oaths that Jews cannot take. A Jewish craftsman might possess skills in metalworking or cloth production, but without guild membership, he cannot legally sell his products in many cities. Similarly, the expansion of craft guilds closes off artisan occupations. Jews can produce goods for their own communities, but face barriers in the general market. Agricultural opportunities also contract. Feudal structures increasingly tie land ownership to military service and Christian oaths of fealty. Jews, as non-Christians who cannot serve as knights, find land ownership difficult or impossible in many regions. Some Jewish farmers remain in southern France and parts of Italy, but in northern Europe, Jewish agriculture virtually disappears by the 13th century. The combination of guild exclusions and land restrictions pushes Jews toward occupations that Christians either cannot or will not pursue themselves. Money lending is one such occupation. Christian theological teachings on usury charging interest on loans create a complex situation. Church doctrine, based on interpretations of biblical passages and Aristotelian philosophy, holds that money is sterile and should not itself generate more money. Charging interest is therefore sinful. In practice, These prohibitions are inconsistently enforced and frequently evaded through various mechanisms. But the official prohibition creates practical difficulties for Christian moneylending. Jewish law takes a different approach. The Torah prohibits charging interest to fellow Jews, but explicitly permits charging interest to non-Jews. This creates a perfect economic niche, an activity that Christians officially cannot perform but desperately need, and that Jews can legally perform. The demand for credit in medieval Europe is substantial and growing. Nobles need loans to purchase military equipment, fund participation in crusades, or maintain their households between harvests. Merchants need capital to purchase goods for trade. Craftsmen need advances to buy raw materials. Farmers facing poor harvests need loans to purchase seed and food until the next crop. The developing money economy creates increasing demand for liquid capital that existing institutions struggle to provide. Monasteries and wealthy individuals provide some loans, often disguising interest through various legal fictions, but the supply is inadequate. Jewish moneylenders fill this gap, providing essential financial services to a credit-hungry economy. The mechanics of Jewish moneylending vary by region and period, but certain patterns emerge. Loans are typically secured by pledges pawns of valuable objects held as collateral. A noble might pawn a piece of jewelry, a merchant a quantity of cloth, a craftsman his tools. Interest rates vary widely, from relatively modest rates for secure loans to wealthy borrowers, to very high rates for risky loans. The high rates often cited in anti-Jewish polemics reflect the genuine risk of lending. Borrowers often default. Legal protections for Jewish creditors are weak, and periodic expulsions or violence can wipe out a lender's entire portfolio of loans. The Jewish moneylending business model depends on several factors for success. First, access to capital. Jewish merchants accumulate funds through trade and pool resources through family networks and communal cooperation. Second, record keeping. Jewish literacy rates and business practices inherited from ancient trading traditions create sophisticated systems for tracking loans, calculating interest, and managing risk. Third, international connections. A Jewish lender in Cologne might have relatives or business associates in Venice or Barcelona, allowing capital to flow across regions and providing refuges if one community faces expulsion. Fourth, communal solidarity. Jewish courts enforce contracts between Jewish lenders and borrowers, and communal pressure ensures individual Jews honor their obligations, creating trust within the network. Yet moneylending creates profound vulnerabilities. The most obvious is that debtors have incentives to avoid repayment. A noble who owes significant sums to a Jewish creditor might support expulsion of Jews from his territory, canceling his debts while seeming to perform a pious act. Kings regularly borrow from Jewish communities and then expel them, keeping their property and canceling royal debts. When English King Edward I expels all Jews from England in 1290, he confiscates their property and cancels debts owed to them, enriching the royal treasury and earning political support from indebted nobles and merchants. The expulsion is financially profitable precisely because Jews are creditors to so many Christians. Moneylending also feeds anti-Jewish sentiment. Christian borrowers resent their Jewish creditors, transforming economic relationships into religious hostility. Preachers denounce Jewish usury as proof of Jewish wickedness, ignoring the Christian demand for loans and the fact that interest rates reflect risk. Popular literature portrays Jewish moneylenders as bloodsuckers, literally draining Christian wealth. The economic resentment combines with religious prejudice to create a toxic mixture. When economic crisis strikes, harvest failures, warfare, plague-indebted populations look for scapegoats, and Jewish creditors become targets. The concentration in moneylending also creates distorted perceptions. Because moneylending is visible and creates documentation, it appears to be the primary Jewish occupation in historical records. Tax records, legal cases, and contemporary accounts discuss Jewish loans extensively, creating the impression that all Jews are wealthy moneylenders. In reality, most medieval Jews are not wealthy. A typical Jewish community includes a few prosperous merchants and moneylenders, a larger group of modest traders and craftsmen serving Jewish needs, and many poor families struggling to survive. The community's tax burden falls heavily on the wealthy few, who also support communal institutions and charity for poorer members. But Christian perception focuses on successful Jewish financiers, not on poor Jewish peddlers or struggling artisans. Long-distance trade offers another crucial economic niche. Jewish merchants maintain trading networks across Europe and into the Mediterranean and Middle East. These networks build on religious and family connections. A merchant in Marseille sending goods to Cairo can trust a Jewish associate there to act honestly, knowing that Jewish law requires fair dealing and that the interconnected community provides enforcement mechanisms. Letters from the Cairo Geniza, a repository of medieval documents preserved in an Egyptian synagogue, revealed the sophistication of these networks. Merchants correspond about prices, shipping routes, political conditions, and personal news. They form partnerships, arrange marriages between families in different cities, and provide assistance to traveling merchants. The Rhineland merchants mentioned in earlier chapters represent the pinnacle of this trading system. These merchants move between Christian Europe, the Islamic world, and even as far as India and China. They speak multiple languages, understand diverse commercial practices, and maintain contacts across vast distances. While the glory days of the Rhinelandites fade by the 12th century as Christian and Muslim merchants develop their own long-distance networks, Jewish merchants continue to play important roles in regional and international trade. They trade in textiles, spices, dyes, precious stones, and other high-value goods that justify the risks of long-distance commerce. Jewish trade faces increasing restrictions through the medieval period. Some cities limit where Jews can trade or impose special taxes on Jewish merchants. Christian merchant guilds petition for restrictions on Jewish competition. Yet Jewish trade continues because Jews provide valuable services, connecting markets, providing credit for purchases, and offering goods that local merchants cannot easily obtain. Some rulers actively protect Jewish trading privileges, recognizing that Jewish commerce enriches their territories. Medicine offers another prestigious occupation. Jewish physicians serve Christians of all classes, from peasants to popes. Several factors contribute to Jewish prominence in medicine. First, Jewish literacy and learning create a foundation for medical study. Second, the study of ancient medical texts, particularly works by Galen and Hippocrates, translated from Greek to Arabic to Hebrew, gives Jewish physicians access to sophisticated medical knowledge. Third, medical practice does not require guild membership or Christian oaths, leaving this profession relatively open. Fourth, Jewish physicians' work across religious boundaries creates opportunities to serve wealthy Christian patients. The most famous Jewish physician is Maimonides, whose medical writings are studied throughout the Mediterranean world. But countless lesser-known Jewish doctors practice medicine in medieval communities. They treat wounds, set broken bones, prescribe herbs and remedies, perform minor surgeries, and provide consultation on health matters. Some specialize in particular areas: eye diseases, childbirth, plague treatment. The medical profession provides both income and political protection. A Jewish physician attending a royal court gains influence and can advocate for his community. Kings and nobles who depend on Jewish physicians for their health are less likely to support anti-Jewish policies. Tax farming is another occupation where Jews find opportunities. Medieval taxation is complex, and rulers often contract with individuals to collect taxes, paying a fixed sum to the crown and keeping whatever additional amounts they can collect. This requires capital to advance the payment, administrative skills to manage collection, and willingness to accept the unpopularity that comes with tax collection. Jews, already unpopular and possessed of necessary skills and capital, sometimes serve as tax farmers. This role provides income and royal protection, but intensifies popular resentment. Throughout these various economic activities, Jewish communities maintain remarkable internal economic organization. Communal institutions regulate commerce, ensuring fair weights and measures in Jewish shops, arbitrating business disputes, and organizing charity for the poor. The kehillah levies taxes on members to pay collective obligations to rulers and fund communal institutions. Wealthy members bear disproportionate tax burdens, but all contribute according to ability. Charity is highly organized, with institutions providing food, clothing, medical care, dowries for poor brides, and support for scholars. The Talmudic principle that even a poor person receiving charity should also give charity creates a culture where economic success carries obligations to the community. This economic system enables survival through multiple mechanisms. Diversified income sources mean that restrictions on one occupation do not destroy the entire community economically. International networks provide refuges when local communities face expulsion. Accumulated wealth allows for protection payments and bribes that forestall violence. Communal solidarity ensures resources are shared during crises. Yet the system also creates vulnerabilities that enemies exploit again and again. Wealth that can be confiscated, debts that can be cancelled through expulsion, and economic resentment that feeds violence. Chapter 5. The Blood Libel, the town of Norwich, England, 1144. Just before Passover, the body of a 12-year-old Christian boy named William is found dead in the woods outside town. The circumstances are unclear, perhaps accident, perhaps murder by unknown assailants. But a convert from Judaism named Theobald of Cambridge brings an accusation that will haunt Jewish communities for centuries. He claims that Jews ritually murdered William using his blood for Passover rituals. The accusation is fantastic, contradicting Jewish law, which strictly prohibits consumption of any blood, making kashrut, Jewish dietary laws, extraordinarily complex to avoid even trace amounts of blood in meat. Yet the accusation takes root. Local monks promote William's cult as a martyr. Miracles are claimed at his tomb. And a new form of anti-Jewish accusation enters medieval consciousness: the blood libel. The Norwich case is the first documented blood libel accusation, but it will not be the last. Over the following centuries, similar accusations appear across Europe. In Blois, France, in 1171, 31 Jews are burned alive after an accusation of crucifying a Christian child. In Lincoln, England, in 1255, the alleged martyrdom of Little St. Hugh leads to the execution of 19 Jews. In Germany, accusations multiply through the 13th century. Each accusation follows similar patterns. A Christian child disappears or is found dead. Jews are accused of ritual murder. Confessions are extracted through torture, and Jewish communities face violence, execution, or expulsion. The blood libel reveals how religious prejudice combines with folk beliefs to create deadly accusations. Medieval Christianity emphasizes Christ's suffering and martyrdom, creating cultural fascination with innocent victims and holy blood. The Eucharist doctrine holds that communion wine literally becomes Christ's blood. Passion plays dramatize Jewish responsibility for Christ's death. In this cultural context, accusations that Jews murder Christian children to mock the crucifixion or obtain blood for rituals find ready acceptance, despite the accusation's inherent absurdity and contradiction of Jewish law. The accusations serve multiple functions beyond religious hatred. They provide explanations for mysterious child deaths in an era before modern forensics. They create communal solidarity through shared outrage. They justify violence against unpopular minorities. They allowed debtors to eliminate creditors and rulers to confiscate property. The accusations are never merely about sincere religious beliefs. They always serve political and economic interests. Church authorities respond inconsistently to blood libel accusations. Some popes, notably Innocent IV in 1247 and Gregory X in 1272, issue bulls condemning the accusations as false and protecting Jews from such charges. These popes recognize that Jewish law prohibits consuming blood and that the accusations contradict basic facts about Jewish practice. The papal condemnations prove ineffective. Local clergy often support or even initiate accusations. Popular belief overrides theological sophistication. Once an accusation takes hold in a region, it becomes part of local tradition, repeated and embellished with each generation. The blood libel is not the only form of ritual accusation Jews face. The host desecration accusation appears in the 13th century, claiming that Jews steal consecrated communion wafers and torture them to mock Christ's suffering. The accusation assumes that Jews accept the Eucharist doctrine, that the wafer is literally Christ as body, and seek to harm Christ through the wafer. The logic is absurd from a Jewish perspective, as Jews obviously do not believe Christian theological claims, but the accusations lead to violence and executions across Europe. Well poisoning accusations represent a third category. During times of plague or epidemic, desperate populations seek explanations for mass death. Jewish communities, often spared the worst effects of plague through strict hygiene practices required by Jewish law, and possibly through ghetto isolation, become suspects. Accusations claim Jews poison wells, causing Christian deaths. During the Black Death of 1348 to 1350, well poisoning accusations lead to the most widespread anti-Jewish violence since the First Crusade. Before discussing that catastrophe in detail, we must understand the pattern these accusations create. Popular violence against Jews in the High Middle Ages follows predictable triggers. Religious holidays, particularly Easter and Passion Week, are dangerous times. Christian preaching emphasizes Jewish responsibility for Christ's death, inflaming emotions. Crusade preparations repeatedly spark violence, as armed mobs preparing to fight infidels overseas attack infidels at home. Economic crises, harvest failures, currency debasements, trade disruptions lead to violence against Jewish creditors. Political transitions, when royal authority weakens during succession disputes or civil wars, remove protection and enable mob violence. Jewish communities develop strategies for managing these threats. They cultivate relationships with local bishops and secular rulers, securing charters of protection and paying for armed guards during dangerous periods. They maintain networks of communication, warning other communities of approaching dangers. They prepare hiding places and refuge arrangements. They learn when to negotiate, when to pay bribes, and when to flee. Yet these strategies have limited effectiveness against mass hysteria or determined violence. The failure of legal protection is particularly striking. Jews possess charters from emperors, kings, and popes guaranteeing their right to practice their religion and protecting them from violence. These documents prove worthless when mobs rampage. Local authorities either cannot or will not enforce protections. Sometimes, authorities actively participate in violence or look the other way while it occurs. The theoretical protection of law means nothing without will and capacity to enforce it. Some Jewish communities attempt armed resistance. Jewish defenders sometimes fight attackers, occasionally successfully. In 1241, Jews in Frankfurt successfully defend against an attack, killing some assailants. But armed resistance carries enormous risks. Even successful defense can be prosecuted as assault on Christians. Defeated resistance leads to massacre. Most communities conclude that armed resistance is futile and instead focus on negotiation, bribery, and preparation for flight. The psychological impact of constant vulnerability shapes Jewish consciousness. Communities live with awareness that violence can erupt at any time, that accusations can appear without warning, that neighbors can become murderers. This awareness influences everything from residential patterns to economic strategies to religious practice. It creates both solidarity within communities and suspicion of outsiders. It reinforces religious identity as the core of survival. If being Jewish brings such danger, maintaining Judaism must be profoundly important. The accusations also affect how Jews view Christian society. In Talmudic times, rabbinic discussions of non-Jews generally distinguished between idolaters and ethical monotheists, with some rabbis arguing that righteous Gentiles have a place in the world to come. Medieval Jewish scholars struggle with how to categorize Christians. Are they monotheists since they claim to worship the God of Israel? Or are they idolaters, given the worship of Jesus and saints? The repeated violence makes abstract theological questions practically urgent. If Christians routinely murder Jews based on false accusations, how can Jews trust or cooperate with them? Some Jewish texts from this period express profound bitterness toward Christians. Poems and chronicles describe Christian cruelty in harsh terms. Legal discussions debate whether the Talmudic principle that one should save even a Gentile's life on the Sabbath applies to Christians who murder Jews. But other texts emphasize coexistence and mutual obligation. Jewish law continues to require ethical treatment of Gentiles. Jewish merchants maintain business relationships with Christian partners. Individual Jews and Christians form genuine friendships despite communal hostilities. The reality is that Jews must navigate complex relationships with Christian society. Total isolation is impossible. Jews need Christian customers. Christian authorities provide protection, and daily life requires interaction. But trust is limited and always contingent. A Christian friend who drinks wine with a Jewish merchant one day might join a mob attacking the Jewish quarter the next day when a preacher inflames his religious passion. This uncertain coexistence, where cooperation and danger coexist, characterizes Jewish life throughout the medieval period. Child disappearances and mysterious deaths occur regularly in medieval communities. Infant mortality is high, accidents are common, and violence is endemic. When such deaths involve Christian children near Jewish communities, they create opportunities for accusation. Sometimes accusations come from malice, a Christian who owes money to Jews and seeks to avoid repayment. Sometimes from superstition, fear of the unfamiliar and different. Sometimes from cynical exploitation rulers who see opportunities to confiscate Jewish property. The causes vary, but the pattern remains consistent. Mysterious death, accusation against Jews, torture producing confession, violence against the community. The confessions extracted under torture deserve special attention. Medieval torture is designed to produce confessions, not truth. Victims say whatever torturers want to hear. Jewish victims of torture confess to ritual murders they never committed, describing ceremonies that never occurred and practices that contradict Jewish law. These confessions are then publicized as proof of Jewish wickedness, convincing Christian populations that the accusations are true. The cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Accusations lead to torture. Torture produces confessions. Confessions justify more accusations. Some historians argue that the blood libel and similar accusations reflect deeper Christian anxieties. Christianity's emphasis on Christ's blood sacrifice, the Eucharist transformation, and salvation through blood creates cultural obsession with blood's spiritual power. These anxieties project onto Jews as the ultimate religious other, the people who rejected Christ and his blood sacrifice. From this perspective, blood libel accusations represent distorted mirrors of Christian beliefs, attributing to Jews the very blood rituals and obsessions that characterize Christianity itself. Whatever the psychological origins, the practical consequences are clear. Blood libel accusations and similar ritual accusations create a permanent atmosphere of suspicion and danger for Jewish communities. They justify violence, legitimate persecution, and make Jewish life precarious. They also establish patterns that extend far beyond the medieval period, with blood libel accusations appearing in early modern Europe, in the Russian Empire, and even in the 20th century. The medieval creation of these accusations plants poisonous seeds that bear bitter fruit for centuries. Yet, even as they face these dangers, Jewish communities continue their daily lives. They celebrate weddings and mourn deaths. They study sacred texts and conduct business. They raise children and maintain hope. The capacity to live fully despite constant danger represents another form of survival, a refusal to let persecution define existence entirely. This balance between vigilance and normalcy, between fear and hope, characterizes medieval Jewish resilience. Chapter 6. The Black Death. The disease arrives in European ports in 1347. Carried on ships from the east, it spreads with terrifying speed through trade routes and cities. Within months, people across Europe are dying in numbers that defy comprehension. The symptoms are horrific. Swollen lymph nodes called buboes, high fever, bleeding under the skin, creating dark patches that give the plague its name, and death within days of symptoms appearing. Medieval medicine is helpless. Physicians prescribe useless remedies. Prayers seem unanswered. By the time the first wave passes in 1350, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population is dead. The Black Death is the greatest demographic catastrophe in European history, and for Jews, it brings violence on a scale not seen since the First Crusade. As plague spreads through Europe in 1348, populations desperate for explanations latch onto a familiar scapegoat. Jews are accused of poisoning wells and contaminating water supplies, deliberately spreading plague to kill Christians. The accusation is absurd for multiple reasons. Jews are dying of plague alongside Christians. Well poisoning could not explain the disease's pattern of spread. Medieval technology could not create poisons that would work as accused. But desperate, terrified populations are not interested in logic. They want someone to blame, someone to punish, some action that might stop the dying. The violence begins in southern France in spring 1348. In Toulon, 40 Jews are murdered. In April, the Jewish community of Apt is attacked. By summer, violence spreads through Provence and into Savoy. In September, a trial in Schillen, Switzerland, extracts confessions under torture from Jewish prisoners who admit to poisoning wells with a mixture of poison provided by rabbis. The confessions describe an international Jewish conspiracy to destroy Christendom. They are entirely fictional, produced by torture, but they are circulated to cities across the region as proof of Jewish guilt. The confessions provide justification for massacres. In Basel, in January 1349, the entire Jewish community is burned in a wooden building constructed specifically for the purpose. In Strasbourg, despite the city council's initial protection, mob pressure forces the authorities to turn against the Jews. On February 14, 1349, Valentine's Day, approximately 900 Jews are burned alive in the Jewish cemetery. Children are forcibly baptized before the massacre. Property is confiscated and distributed to Christian citizens. Similar scenes occur in city after city along the Rhine: Mainz, Cologne, Frankfurt, Erfurt. The Jewish communities that rebuilt after the Crusade massacres 2 centuries earlier are destroyed again. The violence spreads into Germanic territories. In Nuremberg, in Augsburg, and Munich, Jewish communities are attacked. Estimates suggest that somewhere between 200 and 350 Jewish communities in Germanic territories are destroyed during the Black Death period. Some are entirely exterminated. Others see most members killed with survivors fleeing. A few escape through protection by local authorities or early warning that allows flight. The total death toll is impossible to calculate precisely, but likely exceeds many tens of thousands. The pattern of violence reveals its economic motivations. In cities where Jewish communities face massacre, Christian debtors immediately benefit from canceled loans. City councils confiscate Jewish property, using proceeds to fund public works or distribute to citizens. Nobles who owe money to Jewish creditors support or encourage violence. King Charles IV of Bohemia announces in advance that property of murdered Jews will belong to those who killed them, essentially authorizing massacre for profit. The religious pretext of well-poisoning accusations provides cover for economically motivated violence and theft. Some authorities attempt to protect Jews. Pope Clement VI issues bulls in 1348, condemning the well-poisoning accusations and pointing out that Jews are dying of plague alongside Christians. He notes that plague affects regions without Jewish populations and that Jews living in areas without plague are still being attacked, proving the accusations false. Several bishops and some secular rulers try to protect Jewish communities under their authority. But papal and episcopal authority proves ineffective against mob violence and popular hysteria. Protective efforts often fail or even provoke additional violence against authorities who defend Jews. The disease pattern itself provides evidence against Jewish guilt. Plague spreads along trade routes, affecting port cities first and then moving inland. Its spread pattern matches the movement of infected fleas on rats, though medieval people do not understand disease transmission. Jewish neighborhoods often experience somewhat lower mortality rates than Christian areas, likely due to Jewish religious practices that promote cleanliness and hygiene. Frequent hand-washing for ritual purposes, immediate burial of dead bodies, according to Jewish law, avoidance of certain animals considered unclean, and possibly dietary laws that limit contact with potentially infected animals. But these lower rates, rather than being recognized as evidence against Jewish responsibility, are interpreted as proof of guilt. Why would Jews die less frequently unless they knew about the poison and protected themselves? The massacres create massive population displacement. Surviving Jews flee eastward, particularly into Polish and Lithuanian territories. Poland, less affected by plague and with rulers actively welcoming Jewish immigration for economic reasons, becomes a major center of Jewish settlement. King Casimir III of Poland extends protection and privileges to Jewish immigrants, recognizing their value as merchants, craftsmen, and moneylenders in his developing kingdom. This eastward migration begins a demographic shift that will make Eastern Europe the center of Ashanti Jewish life for the next 6 centuries. Some Jewish communities that are destroyed during the Black Death are later reconstituted. After the immediate plague hysteria passes, economic needs and royal interests sometimes lead to invitations for Jews to return. Jews are offered charters of protection, promises of property restoration, and guarantees against further violence. But these reconstructed communities are typically smaller, poorer, and more vulnerable than their predecessors. The population losses, property confiscations, and trauma create lasting damage. The psychological and spiritual impact on Jewish communities is profound. Hebrew chronicles and religious poetry from the period express anguish, questioning, and attempts to find meaning in catastrophe. Why would God allow such suffering to his chosen people? How should communities memorialize the dead? What lessons should be drawn for future generations? The theological responses vary, but common themes emphasize divine testing, the merit of martyrdom, and the inscrutable nature of God's judgment. Communities create memorial prayers and fasting days to commemorate the massacres. Names of martyrs are recorded and read aloud in synagogues. The trauma becomes part of collective memory, joining the Crusade massacres and other catastrophes in a narrative of suffering and survival. The Black Death massacres also have long-term legal and social consequences. Many cities and territories that expelled Jews during the plague period establish restrictions preventing Jewish resettlement. Some issue perpetual bans on Jewish residents. Others impose strict conditions on any future Jewish settlement. Numerical limits, restrictions on economic activities, requirements for distinctive clothing, mandatory residence in segregated quarters. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 had already mandated that Jews wear distinctive badges or clothing, but enforcement had been inconsistent. After the Black Death, such restrictions are more systematically enforced and expanded. The concept of the ghetto, a segregated Jewish quarter with gates locked at night, develops partly in response to the Black Death period. While Jewish quarters existed before, they were often voluntary clustering for community and security. After the plague, segregation becomes mandatory in many cities, with walls and gates controlling Jewish movement. The ghetto serves multiple purposes from a Christian perspective. It separates Jews from Christians to avoid contamination. It makes Jewish populations easily monitored and controlled, and it facilitates taxation and restrictions on Jewish economic activity. For Jewish communities, the ghetto has contradictory effects. It increases vulnerability by concentrating the population in areas that can be easily attacked and by restricting escape routes during violence. But it also strengthens communal identity and institutions. The forced separation reinforces Jewish distinctiveness and reduces assimilatory pressures. The concentration allows for efficient organization of communal institutions, easier enforcement of Jewish law, and stronger social bonds. Over time, the ghetto becomes not just a place of confinement, but a space of intensive Jewish cultural life. The Black Death period marks a turning point in medieval Jewish history. The scale of violence exceeds previous catastrophes. The economic and demographic losses take generations to recover from. The eastward migration fundamentally reshapes the geography of Jewish settlement. The intensification of legal restrictions and social segregation creates new patterns that persist for centuries. Yet once again, communities survive. Refugees rebuild in new locations. Institutions are re-established. Texts are recopied. Study continues. The resilience demonstrated in the wake of the Black Death catastrophe testifies to the survival strategies Jews have developed over centuries of persecution. The question of how Jewish communities psychologically cope with such repeated catastrophes deserves consideration. Modern trauma studies suggest that sustained persecution creates profound psychological effects on populations. Medieval sources do not provide direct access to individual psychology, but communal responses suggest several coping mechanisms. Religious faith provides meaning, interpreting suffering as divine testing or as punishment for communal sins that can be rectified. Communal solidarity provides support, with survivors helping each other materially and emotionally. Future orientation provides hope, emphasizing children's education and community rebuilding. Historical memory provides context, connecting contemporary suffering to ancient traditions of Jewish persecution and survival. These mechanisms allow communities not just to survive physically, but to maintain cultural vitality and even creativity despite trauma. The same century that sees the Black Death massacres also sees the flourishing of Jewish mysticism in Spain, the development of new forms of religious poetry, advances in biblical commentary, and continued economic activity. This capacity for cultural productivity, despite catastrophe, represents one of the most remarkable aspects of medieval Jewish survival. Chapter 7: Iberian Jewry and the Golden Age in the city of Cordoba. In 950, a young Jewish boy named Hasdai ibn Shaprad studies medicine and languages in an atmosphere of intellectual sophistication impossible to imagine in Christian Europe of the same period. Muslim Spain Al-Andalus is experiencing a golden age of culture, science, and philosophy. The Umayyad caliphs rule from Cordoba, a city with hundreds of thousands of inhabitants, paved streets, streetlights, running water, libraries, and a culture that values learning. Jews participate fully in this flourishing. Hasdai himself will rise to become physician and advisor to the caliph, conducting diplomatic correspondence in multiple languages and supporting Jewish scholarship across the Mediterranean. His career exemplifies the opportunities available to Jews under Islamic rule opportunities that make Iberian Jewish culture the most sophisticated in the medieval world. The history of Jews in the Iberian Peninsula stretches back to Roman times, but Jewish culture truly flourishes under Islamic rule from the 8th through 12th centuries. The Islamic legal category of dhimmi, protected people, applies to Jews and Christians in Muslim territories. Dhimmi status is subordinate to Muslims. Dhimmis pay special taxes, face restrictions on religious expression, cannot testify against Muslims in court, and must show deference to Islam in various ways. But within these constraints, dhimmis can practice their religions, engage in commerce, and achieve significant social status. The contrast with Christian Europe, where Jews face increasing restrictions and periodic violence, makes Islamic territories attractive for Jewish settlement. Cordoba, under the Umayyad Caliphate, becomes a center of Jewish culture. Jewish scholars write poetry in Arabic, adopting Arabic meters and forms while maintaining Hebrew religious content. They study Greek philosophy in Arabic translation, engaging with Aristotelian and Platonic thought. They practice medicine using advanced techniques from the Islamic world. They serve in governmental positions, managing finances and conducting diplomacy. The mixing of Arabic culture with Jewish tradition creates a synthesis that transforms Jewish intellectual life. The most remarkable figure of early Andalusian Jewry is Samuel ibn Negrela, known as Samuel Hanajid, who lives in Granada in the 11th century. Samuel serves as vizier chief minister to the Muslim ruler of Granada, essentially running the government. He also commands armies in battle, a role almost unimaginable for Jews in Christian territories. Simultaneously, Samuel is a distinguished Hebrew poet, a Talmudic scholar, and a patron of Jewish learning. His career represents the pinnacle of Jewish political achievement in the medieval Islamic world. When Samuel dies in 1056, his son Joseph succeeds him as vizier, though Joseph's career ends tragically when political rivals engineer his assassination and massacre Granada's Jewish community in 1066. Jewish poetry flourishes in Iberia in forms unknown in Christian Europe. Poets write religious poetry for synagogue use, but also secular poetry celebrating wine, nature, friendship, and love. Judah Halevi, born in 1075, creates works that are still considered masterpieces of Hebrew literature. His religious poems express profound devotion and longing for Zion, the land of Israel that Jews cannot return to. His secular poems describe gardens, beautiful companions, and the pleasures of intellectual conversation. The combination of sacred and secular, of Jewish content and Arabic-influenced forms, characterizes Iberian Jewish culture. Solomon ibn Gabriel, another towering poet-philosopher, writes both Hebrew religious poetry and philosophical works in Arabic. His philosophical magnum opus, The Fountain of Life, never mentions Judaism explicitly and becomes influential in Christian scholastic philosophy, with many readers unaware of the author's Jewish identity. This cultural boundary crossing Jews creating works that transcend religious categories and influence broader intellectual currents is distinctively Iberian. The Jewish philosophical tradition reaches its apex with Moses Maimonides, discussed earlier, whose family flees Cordoba when the fanatical Almohad dynasty conquers the city in 1148, demanding conversion or death. Maimonides' career, spent mostly in Egypt, builds on the Iberian intellectual tradition of combining Jewish learning with philosophy and science. His massive legal code, the Mishneh Torah, and his philosophical guide for the perplexed represent the culmination of the Golden Age synthesis of Jewish tradition with Greco-Arabic learning. But what makes this Golden Age possible several factors converge. Islamic culture in this period values learning and tolerates religious diversity more than contemporary Christian Europe. The dhimmi system, while subordinating non-Muslims, provides a stable legal framework, allowing Jews to plan long-term and invest in education and enterprise. The Arabic language serves as a lingua franca, enabling Jews to participate in broader intellectual culture, while maintaining Hebrew for religious purposes. Economic prosperity in Al-Andalus creates demand for the commercial and administrative skills that Jews possess. And perhaps most importantly, the absence of systematic theological anti-Judaism in Islam, which does not hold Jews responsible for rejecting a divine savior, reduces religious motivations for violence. The relationship between Jews and Muslims in Iberia is not without tensions. Jews suffer from tax burdens, occasional violence, and the constant awareness of subordinate status. The Granada massacre of 1066 demonstrates that violence can erupt even in relatively tolerant contexts. But compared to contemporary conditions in Christian Europe, Iberian Jews under Islamic rule experience remarkable security and opportunity. This changes dramatically as Christian kingdoms reconquer the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim control, a process called the Reconquista that unfolds over centuries. As Christian armies recapture territories, Jewish communities come under Christian rule. Initially, Christian kings recognize Jewish value and continue protective policies. Jews serve as administrators, translators, tax collectors, and commercial intermediaries between Christian, Muslim, and Jewish populations. The multilingual, retry and continue edit, multicultural skills of Iberian Jews make them invaluable during the transition from Muslim to Christian rule. In the 13th and 14th centuries, Jews in Christian Iberia occupy a complex position. They serve in royal courts as physicians, financial advisors, and diplomatic agents. Jewish scholars continue producing important works of philosophy, biblical commentary, and mysticism. Jewish translators render Arabic and Hebrew texts into Latin, transmitting Islamic science and philosophy to Christian Europe. The Toledo school of translators, active in the 12th and 13th centuries, includes numerous Jewish scholars who serve as bridges between Islamic and Christian intellectual worlds. Yet the position of Iberian Jewry under Christian rule gradually deteriorates. Several factors drive this decline. The Church increasingly pressures Christian rulers to restrict Jewish privileges and enforce canonical restrictions on Jews. Mendicant orders, Franciscans and Dominicans preach against Jews and organize forced disputations where Jewish scholars must defend Judaism against Christian theological attacks. Economic resentment grows as Jews continue in financial and administrative roles. And perhaps most significantly, religious fervor intensifies as the Reconquista approaches completion, transforming what had been a multi-religious society into an increasingly intolerant Christian one. The forced disputations deserve special attention as they reveal the pressure on Jewish communities. In 1263, in Barcelona, the great scholar Moses ben Nachman, known as Nachmanides or Ramban, is compelled to debate Christianity with a Jewish convert to Christianity named Pablo Cristiani. The disputation occurs before King James I of Aragon and a large audience. The format is inherently unfair. Nachmanides must criticize Christianity while avoiding blasphemy charges, defend Judaism without offending Christian sensibilities, and demonstrate intellectual sophistication while showing proper deference to Christian authority. Nachmanides navigates these impossible constraints brilliantly, but afterward faces charges that his defense was too aggressive. He must leave Spain, eventually settling in the land of Israel. The Tortosa disputation of 1413 to 1414 is even more coercive. It lasts nearly 2 years, with Jewish representatives compelled to attend session after session. The Christian side, led by another convert from Judaism named Joshua Lorchi, now Geronimo de Santa Fe, uses Talmudic passages to argue that Judaism itself prophesies Christianity's truth. The disputation occurs amid intense pressure on Jewish communities and contributes to a wave of forced conversions. Thousands of Jews, worn down by pressure, economic restrictions, violence, and the apparent futility of resistance, accept baptism during this period. These converts, called conversos or new Christians, create a new and tragic phenomenon in Iberian Jewish history. Some conversos genuinely embrace Christianity. Others convert for practical reasons to escape persecution, maintain property, pursue careers close to Jews while privately maintaining Jewish practices. These secret Jews, called Marranos, a derogatory term possibly meaning pigs, live double lives of extraordinary difficulty and danger. Publicly, they attend church, baptize their children, eat pork, and observe Christian holidays. Privately, in locked rooms with windows covered, they light Sabbath candles, refrain from work on Saturday, avoid pork and shellfish, and teach their children Jewish prayers. The Inquisition, established in Spain in 1478 under Ferdinand and Isabella, specifically targets these crypto-Jews. Unlike medieval inquisitions that focused on Christian heretics, the Spanish Inquisition obsesses over conversos suspected of secretly practicing Judaism. Inquisitors develop elaborate methods to detect crypto-Jewish practices. Does the family's chimney stop smoking on Friday nights, suggesting they are not cooking on the Sabbath? Do they clean their houses unusually thoroughly on Fridays? Do they change their linens on Saturdays? Do they avoid pork? Do they prepare food in particular ways? Neighbors are encouraged to inform on each other. Children are questioned about their parents' practices. Servants provide evidence against employers. Those accused face imprisonment, interrogation, and often torture. The Inquisition uses psychological pressure and physical pain to extract confessions. Those who confess and show repentance might receive penances and be reconciled to the church. Those who refuse to confess or who relapse into Judaism after confession face death by burning. The auto da fe, the public ceremony of penance and execution, becomes a central feature of Spanish religious life. Crowds gather to watch as convicted heretics, wearing distinctive garments called sanbenitos, are paraded through streets before being burned at the stake. The scale of the Inquisition's operations is staggering. Over the course of its existence, the Spanish Inquisition tries tens of thousands of people, executing perhaps several thousand. But the psychological impact extends far beyond those directly tried. Entire communities live in fear of denunciation. Families suspect each other of informing. The maintenance of crypto-Jewish practice becomes increasingly difficult and dangerous as the Inquisition develops sophisticated detection methods. For openly practicing Jews who have not converted, the situation also deteriorates through the 15th century. Restrictions multiply. Jews must live in segregated quarters, wear distinctive badges, avoid certain occupations, and pay special taxes. Periodic violence erupts, with mobs attacking Jewish quarters in 1391 in a wave of violence that kills thousands and forces many conversions. The monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, celebrated for completing the Reconquista by conquering Granada in 1492, decide on a final solution to what they view as the Jewish problem. The Edict of Expulsion, issued on March 31, 1492, orders all practicing Jews to leave Spain within 4 months. The edict is justified on religious grounds. The presence of Jews supposedly tempts conversos to relapse into Judaism, so removing Jews entirely will protect the faith of new Christians. Jews must either convert or leave, abandoning property they cannot sell in time, taking only what they can carry. The deadline is August 2nd, though it is later extended slightly. Estimates suggest 40,000 to 100,000 Jews choose exile over conversion, while perhaps 50,000 or more accept baptism to remain. The exiles' experiences are harrowing. Some travel to Portugal, only to face expulsion there 5 years later. Others go to North Africa, where they face hostility from local Jewish communities who resent the newcomers' different customs and the strain they place on limited resources. Some travel to the Ottoman Empire, where Sultan Bayezid II welcomes them, allegedl, while remarking that Ferdinand must be foolish to impoverish his kingdom by expelling productive Jews. In Ottoman territories, Sephardic refugees establish new communities, maintaining Spanish Jewish customs and even continuing to speak Ladino, a Judeo-Spanish language, for centuries. Some exile ships face catastrophic journeys. Captains abandon passengers on barren coasts. Pirates capture ships and enslave passengers. Disease spreads in overcrowded vessels. Some exiles die during the journey, never reaching their intended destinations. Families are separated, with some members converting to stay while others choose exile. Elderly people die from the hardships of travel. Children are kidnapped and forcibly baptized. The human cost of the expulsion is immense. The expulsion of Spanish Jewry marks the end of the most sophisticated Jewish culture in medieval Europe. The achievements of Iberian Jewry in philosophy, poetry, science, and biblical scholarship represent the pinnacle of medieval Jewish intellectual life. Maimonides, Nachmanides, Ibn Gabriel, Halevi, and countless others created works that shaped Jewish thought for centuries. The destruction of this community scatters its members across the Mediterranean and creates the Sephardic diaspora that remains distinct from Ashkenazi Jewry even today. Yet even this catastrophe does not end Jewish survival. The exiles rebuild communities in new locations. They preserve their traditions, texts, and cultural practices. In the Ottoman Empire, in North Africa, in Italy, in the Netherlands, and eventually in the New World, Sephardic communities maintain their identity and continue their intellectual traditions. Some converso families maintain crypto-Jewish practices in Spain and Portugal for generations, even centuries, keeping alive a hidden Jewish identity despite constant danger. In the 20th and 21st centuries, some of their descendants reclaim Jewish identity openly, connecting to communities their ancestors left 500 years earlier. The Iberian Jewish experience demonstrates both the heights medieval Jews could reach in favorable conditions and the precariousness of Jewish security, even in the most successful communities. The Golden Age and the expulsion stand in stark contrast, illustrating how quickly opportunity can transform into catastrophe. The memory of Sephard, the Hebrew name for Spain, becomes central to Sephardic Jewish identity, a lost paradise remembered in poetry, liturgy, and collective memory. Even as communities rebuild elsewhere, they maintain customs, foods, songs, and prayers that link them to their Iberian origins, ensuring that the culture nearly destroyed by expulsion survives in new forms across the world. Chapter 8. Life in the Kehillah. In a typical German Jewish community of the 14th century, a day begins before dawn. The shamash, the synagogue attendant, moves through the narrow streets of the Jewish quarter, knocking on doors to wake men from morning prayers. Inside homes, women rise to prepare breakfast, draw water, and begin the day's domestic work. Men hurry through dark streets to the synagogue, where they wrap themselves in prayer shawls and bind tefillin small boxes containing biblical passages to their arms and foreheads. The morning service begins as the first light appears. Voices joining in ancient prayers recited by Jewish communities across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East at this same moment. Understanding how Jewish communities survived requires looking beyond persecution and catastrophe to examine daily life. How do these communities organize themselves? What institutions make collective survival possible? How do ordinary people navigate the challenges of maintaining Jewish identity while living as minorities in hostile environments? The Kehillah, the organized Jewish community, provides the framework that makes survival possible. Each Jewish community functions as a semi-autonomous corporation within the larger Christian or Muslim society. The kehillah holds collective responsibility for its members, managing internal affairs with minimal outside interference. This arrangement suits both Jewish communities, who want to maintain religious practices and traditions, and Christian rulers, who prefer dealing with identifiable leaders rather than managing Jewish populations directly. The kehillah model develops over centuries, adapting Roman and late antique Jewish organizational patterns to medieval conditions. The kehillah's governance structure varies by region and period but follows general patterns. Leadership typically rests with a council of elders or an assembly of householders. In some communities, all male heads of households participate in decision-making. In others, wealthy and learned men form an oligarchy. The community elects or appoints officials for specific functions: judges for the rabbinical court, tax assessors and collectors, supervisors of ritual slaughter and food preparation, administrators of charity funds, and various other positions. The most important position is often the rabbi, though in smaller communities, a single learned man might serve multiple functions. The rabbi's role differs somewhat from modern conceptions. Medieval rabbis are primarily judges and legal authorities rather than pastoral leaders or preachers. They answer questions about Jewish law, adjudicate disputes, supervise divorces and conversions, and ensure religious standards are maintained. Rabbis typically support themselves through other occupations as merchants, moneylenders, or communal employees, with the rabbinate being more a function than a full-time paid position, except in the largest communities. The kehillah's most critical function is tax collection. Jewish communities owe taxes to rulers, and the community collectively bears responsibility for these payments. If the community's assessed taxes are not paid, authorities might imprison community leaders, confiscate property, or threaten expulsion. The kehillah must therefore assess individual members' wealth, collect taxes, and deliver payments to authorities. This creates significant internal tensions. Wealthy members complain about bearing disproportionate tax burdens. Disputes erupt over assessment methods. Some individuals try to evade taxes, forcing the community to develop enforcement mechanisms. Tax collection is complicated by the fact that Jewish communal taxes support not only payments to external authorities, but also internal communal institutions. The community must fund the synagogue, the ritual bath, the cemetery, the study house, salaries for teachers and communal officials, and charity for the poor. The total tax burden on individual Jews can be substantial, particularly for the wealthy few who bear most of the load. Yet the system functions because community members recognize that collective institutions are essential for survival. The rabbinical court, or Beit Din, handles internal disputes. Jews are generally prohibited from bringing disputes against other Jews before non-Jewish courts, a rule designed to maintain communal autonomy and avoid airing internal conflicts before outsiders. The rabbinical court adjudicates business disputes, inheritance conflicts, marriage and divorce cases, and questions of religious practice. Judges apply Jewish law, drawing on Talmudic precedents and later legal codes. The decisions create precedents for the community and contribute to the body of responsa literature that connects Jewish legal practice across time and space. The court's power rests primarily on communal consent and social pressure rather than coercive force. The kehillah has limited ability to punish violations physically, but it can impose powerful social sanctions. Public shaming, exclusion from synagogue honors, denial of access to communal services, and in extreme cases, excommunication. Excommunication is a severe penalty, cutting the individual off from Jewish religious life and making others forbidden from interacting with them. The threat of excommunication gives the community significant leverage to enforce compliance with communal decisions. Marriage and family life operate according to Jewish law and custom, creating patterns distinct from surrounding Christian society. Marriages are arranged, typically by parents with the couple's consent, though the degree of choice varies. Economic considerations are central. Families negotiate dowries, assess the groom's earning potential and scholarly promise, and seek matches that create beneficial alliances between families. Girls marry young, often in their early to mid-teens, to men typically a few years older. The marriage creates not just a union between individuals, but an alliance between families, with obligations and expectations extending across generations. The wedding itself is a major communal event. The ceremony occurs under a chuppah, a canopy symbolizing the new household being established. The groom presents the bride with a ring, reciting a formula that makes the marriage legally binding. A ketubah, a marriage contract specifying the husband's financial obligations to the wife, is read aloud. 7 blessings are recited. The groom breaks a glass, traditionally interpreted as remembrance of the destroyed temple in Jerusalem, even in moments of joy. After the ceremony, the community celebrates with music, dancing, and feasting that can last for days in wealthy families. Within marriage, gender roles are clearly defined, but not without complexity. Men bear responsibility for Torah study, public prayer, and economic support. Women manage households, raise children, and often participate in economic activity. Jewish women in medieval Europe frequently work outside the home, buying and selling goods, managing family businesses while husbands travel or study, and sometimes operating as moneylenders independently. Sources reveal women who are literate, who manage complex financial affairs, and who exercise significant economic authority. This economic activity is necessary for family survival, and particularly important when husbands devote time to unpaid Torah study. The birth of children is celebrated, particularly sons who will continue the family name and religious obligations. A son is circumcised on the 8th day after birth in a ceremony that formally enters him into the covenant with God. The Brit Milah, as the circumcision ceremony is called, is a major family and communal celebration. The Maho, a specialist in ritual circumcision, performs the procedure while the community watches. For daughters, there is no equivalent ceremony, but they are named in the synagogue and welcomed into the community. Childhood in Jewish communities emphasizes education, at least for boys. Formal schooling begins around age 5, with boys attending Keder Elementary Religious School. The Melamed, or teacher, instructs students in reading Hebrew, memorizing prayers, and studying Torah. Discipline is strict, with corporal punishment common for inattention or misbehavior. The curriculum expands as boys grow. Biblical study with commentaries, basic Talmud, and for the most advanced students, complex legal reasoning. Poor families struggle to pay tuition, but communal subsidies often ensure even poor boys receive basic education. Girls' education is less formal and more variable. Most learn basic prayers and religious obligations from their mothers. Some wealthy families hire tutors to teach daughters Hebrew reading. A few exceptional women become learned in texts and law, like Dolce of Worms in the 13th century, who reportedly taught groups of women about religious law. But most Jewish women's education focuses on practical skills: food preparation according to kashrut, ritual observance, managing households, and business skills they will need as wives and economic partners. Daily life revolves around religious observance. The Jewish calendar, different from the Christian one, structures time through holidays and Sabbaths. The weekly Sabbath, from Friday evening to Saturday evening, requires cessation from work and creative activity. Families prepare elaborate meals, light candles, recite blessings, attend synagogue services, and spend time in study and rest. The Sabbath is simultaneously a burden requiring advanced preparation and opportunity costs from lost work time and a joy, providing respite from work and dedicated family time. The annual cycle of holidays marks the year: Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in autumn, Sukkot with its temporary booths, Hanukkah in winter, Purim with its festive celebration and dramatic reading of the Esther Scroll. Passover with its elaborate Seder meal and week of eating unleavened bread. Shavuot in late spring. Each holiday requires specific observances, special foods, and communal celebrations. These cyclical celebrations reinforce Jewish identity and create sharp temporal distinctions between Jewish and Christian time. Food observance creates daily distinction. Kashrut Jewish dietary law prohibits pork, shellfish, and other foods, requires ritual slaughter of permitted animals, mandates separation of meat and dairy products, and establishes procedures for food preparation. These requirements mean Jews cannot casually share meals with Christians, reinforcing social separation. The kehillah employs religious officials to supervise food preparation. Ritual slaughterers who know the proper methods and can inspect animals for defects that would render them non-kosher. Supervisors who monitor butchers and bakers to ensure standards are maintained. Families invest significant effort in maintaining kosher kitchens, with separate dishes for meat and dairy, careful checking of foods for forbidden elements, and constant vigilance. The ritual bath, or mikveh, is an essential communal institution. Women immerse after menstruation and before marriage. Men in some communities immerse before Sabbaths and holidays. The mikveh requires specific construction. It must contain a minimum volume of water from natural sources, maintained at proper levels and cleanliness. The community builds and maintains the mikveh, employs an attendant to supervise its use, and ensures access for all members. For women, mikveh immersion is a private ritual with profound religious significance, marking transitions in family purity status and enabling marital relations. The synagogue serves as the center of communal life. Unlike Christian churches with their elaborate decoration, medieval synagogues are relatively simple. A room with an ark containing Torah scrolls, a bima or platform for reading, benches for worshippers, and separate sections for women. Men gather 3 times daily for communal prayer. On Sabbaths and holidays, the community gathers for extended services featuring Torah reading and additional liturgy. The synagogue is also a social center where announcements are made, communal business is discussed, and strangers seeking hospitality are identified. Hospitality is a major communal obligation. Traveling merchants, students journeying to study with distant teachers, refugees from persecution, and messengers collecting charity for communities in distress all require accommodation. The kehillah organizes hospitality, assigning travelers to households that can host them. Wealthy families bear disproportionate hospitality burdens, but all families participate. This hospitality network enables the mobility that Jewish economic and intellectual life requires, ensuring that Jews can travel knowing they will find food, shelter, and assistance in communities along their routes. Charity is highly organized. The kehillah maintains multiple charitable funds, daily food distribution for the poor, sick care, dowries for poor brides, ransoming of captives seized by pirates or hostile forces, support for Torah scholars, and aid for communities facing catastrophes. Charity is not voluntary but obligatory, with the community assessing members and collecting funds for these purposes. The principle is that even poor people receiving charity should also give charity, maintaining dignity through participation in mutual aid. The cemetery is sacred communal space. Jewish law requires burial, not cremation, and mandates that burial occur quickly, typically within 24 hours of death. The kehillah maintains the cemetery, purchases or secures land for it, employs grave diggers, and ensures burials follow proper procedures. The Shevra Kadisha, the Burial Society, is a voluntary organization that prepares bodies for burial according to Jewish law, washing and purifying the body, dressing it in simple white shrouds regardless of the person's wealth in life, and staying with the body until burial. Serving in the Shevra Kadisha is considered especially meritorious, as it is a kindness that can never be repaid. The cemetery also serves as refuge during attacks, Because Christian superstition fears desecrating burial grounds, cemeteries sometimes provide temporary safety during violence. But cemeteries are also targets for desecration by hostile populations. Protecting the cemetery is a communal priority, and elaborate rules govern its use and maintenance. This detailed examination of daily life reveals how Jewish communities maintain identity and cohesion. The institutions of the kehillah provide structure. The cycle of Sabbaths and holidays creates temporal distinction. Dietary laws create daily distinctiveness. Marriage patterns, education priorities, and economic cooperation create dense networks of relationships within the community. These mechanisms work together to preserve Jewish identity across generations, despite external pressures toward assimilation or conversion. Yet this cohesive communal life comes with costs. Individual autonomy is limited by communal expectations and requirements. Dissent from communal norms brings social pressure and potential sanctions. The tax burden is heavy. Communal politics can be contentious, with disputes over leadership, resource allocation, and priorities. Some individuals chafe at restrictions, seeking greater integration with Christian society or resenting the dominance of wealthy elites in communal governance. But for most medieval Jews, the kehillah represents essential infrastructure for survival, making individual life possible through collective organization. Chapter 9. Eastward Migration and the Polish Haven. The year is 1264, and Duke Bolesław V of Kalisz issues a charter that will shape Jewish history for centuries. The Statute of Kalisz grants extensive privileges to Jews settling in his territories: protection of life and property, freedom to trade, jurisdiction of internal disputes by Jewish courts, and safety from accusations without proper evidence. The statute explicitly addresses blood libel accusations, requiring multiple Christian witnesses before such charges can be brought and imposing penalties for false accusations. This remarkable document reflects the Polish nobility's recognition that Jewish settlement brings economic benefits to their developing territories. Over the following centuries, Poland becomes the primary refuge for Jews fleeing persecution in Western Europe, eventually hosting the largest Jewish population in the world. The eastward migration of Ashkenazi Jews from Germanic lands begins gradually in the 13th century and accelerates dramatically during the Black Death and its aftermath. The catastrophes in Western Europe coincide with opportunities in Eastern Europe. Polish and Lithuanian rulers actively recruit Jews to settle in their territories, which lag behind Western Europe economically. The nobility recognizes that Jews bring valuable skills, commercial expertise, international trading connections, literacy, and experience in managing finances and trade. Unlike Western European territories with established Christian merchant classes that view Jews as competitors, Eastern European territories welcome Jewish economic activity as development. The migration proceeds along established routes. Jews from the Rhineland move eastward into Bohemia and Moravia. From there, some continue into Poland proper, while others move south into Hungary. The communities maintain connections with their places of origin, seeking guidance from Western European rabbinical authorities and maintaining similar customs and traditions. Yet the Eastern communities also develop distinctive characteristics shaped by their new environments. Polish Jewish communities in the 14th and 15th centuries enjoy relative prosperity and security. The Szlachta Polish nobility grant Jews the right to lease estates, manage mills and taverns, collect tolls and taxes, and trade freely. Jews become economic intermediaries between the nobility who own vast lands and the peasant serfs who work them. Jewish leaseholders manage noble estates. Jewish merchants buy agricultural produce and sell urban goods, and Jewish innkeepers serve as social centers in small towns and villages. This economic role creates a complex triangular relationship. Nobles depend on Jews for revenue, peasants encounter Jews as representatives of noble authority, and Jews occupy a middle position between privileged aristocrats and oppressed serfs. The system works well for Jews and nobility, but creates resentment among peasants and urban Christian merchants. Peasants who pay rents to Jewish estate managers or who drink in Jewish taverns often conflate their exploitation by the noble system with their interactions with Jewish intermediaries. Urban merchants resent Jewish competition and petition for restrictions on Jewish trade. The Catholic Church in Poland promotes anti-Jewish attitudes similar to those in Western Europe. But as long as the nobility finds Jewish economic activity profitable and the crown supports Jewish settlement, these hostilities remain manageable. Polish Jewish communities establish robust institutions modeled on those in Western Europe, but adapted to local conditions. The kehillah, plural of kehillah in Poland, develop more elaborate organizational structures than their Western European counterparts. The Council of Four Lands, established in the 16th century, coordinates between major Polish Jewish communities, allocating tax burdens, adjudicating intercommunal disputes, and representing Jewish interests to royal and noble authorities. This regional organization provides unprecedented coordination and collective strength. The Lithuanian territories, which joined Poland in political union in 1569, offer similar opportunities and develop significant Jewish populations. Jewish communities settle not only in major cities like Krakow, Lublin, and Lwów, but also in countless small towns and villages throughout the territories. These small-town Jews, living in communities called shtetls, develop a distinctive culture. The shtetl becomes central to Eastern European Jewish identity, a small town perhaps with only a few dozen or hundred Jewish families organized around a marketplace where Jews trade with Christian peasants with a wooden synagogue, a ritual bath, a study house, and a cemetery just outside town. Life in the shtetl is materially modest but spiritually rich. Most families survive on small-scale trade, artisan work, or service occupations. Luxury is rare, but families generally have enough to eat, basic shelter, and the resources to maintain religious observance. What the shtetl lacks in material wealth, it compensates for in cultural intensity. Even small communities maintain schools for boys, organize prayer services, ritual observances, and vibrant traditions of scholarship and storytelling. The economic opportunities in Poland allow some Jews to achieve substantial wealth. Court Jews serve Polish and Lithuanian nobility as financial advisors, tax farmers, and commercial agents. Jewish merchants trade internationally, connecting Polish grain and timber exports with Western European markets. Jewish artisans produce goods for both Jewish and Christian customers. The diversity of economic activities prevents the near-complete concentration in money lending that characterize some Western European communities. The relative security also allows for cultural flourishing. Poland becomes a major center of rabbinic learning, eventually surpassing Western European communities. Yeshivot in Lublin, Krakow, and other cities attract students from across Europe. Rabbi Moses Israels, known as the Rima, living in Krakow in the 16th century, produces a monumental gloss on the Shulchan Aruch, the comprehensive code of Jewish law compiled by Joseph Caro in the Ottoman Empire. Caro's code primarily reflects Sephardic customs from Iberian and Ottoman Jewry. So, Israels adds notes indicating Ashkenazi practices, making the combined work authoritative for both major Jewish traditions. The security and prosperity of Polish Jewry should not be romanticized. Anti-Jewish violence occurs periodically. Economic restrictions multiply over time. Church pressure leads to the mandatory Jewish badge and ghetto residence in some cities. The Jesuit order, arriving in Poland in the late 16th century, promotes anti-Jewish preaching and policies. Local disputes between Jews and Christians sometimes escalate to violence. Accusations of ritual murder appear in Poland as they have in Western Europe. Yet compared to the catastrophes of Western European Jewish history, Poland offers relative haven allowing communities to grow and prosper. The demographic impact is significant. By 1500, Poland hosts perhaps 30,000 Jews, a modest number. By 1650, the population approaches 500,000, making Poland home to the vast majority of world Jewry. This demographic shift fundamentally changes Jewish geography. The centers of Jewish life move eastward. The Yiddish language, a Jewish language combining Hebrew, German, and Slavic elements, develops and spreads throughout Eastern European Jewish communities, becoming the everyday language of millions. Yiddish literature eventually flourishes, creating a vibrant secular Jewish culture alongside religious traditions. The Lithuanian Grand Duchy, before its union with Poland, also attracts Jewish settlement. The Lithuanian rulers issue charters similar to Poland's, recognizing Jewish economic value. Jewish communities in Lithuania developed their own rabbinic authorities and customs, though maintaining connections with Polish Jewry. The Vilna community eventually becomes renowned for its scholarship, producing in the 18th century Rabbi Elijah ben Solomon Zalman, known as the Vilna Gaon, whose intellectual authority shapes modern Jewish orthodoxy. The eastward migration creates interesting religious and cultural dynamics. The refugees bring with them the rabbinic traditions of medieval Germany and France, the legal methodology of Rashi and the Tosafists, the customs of the Rhineland communities, the memory of martyrdom during Crusades and Black Death. These traditions transplant to Eastern Europe, where they encounter different conditions: less immediate persecution, more economic opportunity, and geographic distance from Western European cultural developments. The result is a conservative preservation of medieval Ashkenazi tradition. While Western European Jews in the early modern period begin encountering Enlightenment ideas and modernity, Eastern European Jews in Poland and Lithuania maintain more traditional patterns for additional centuries. The Polish nobility's support for Jewish settlement is pragmatic rather than principled. Nobles benefit economically from Jewish commercial activity and tax revenues. But this protection is transactional and can evaporate if economic or political calculations change. The nobles make no ideological commitment to tolerance or Jewish rights. They simply find Jewish settlement useful for their interests. This creates a fundamentally unstable situation where Jewish security depends on continued noble interest, rather than on principle or law. The peasant resentment simmering beneath the surface of Polish Jewish prosperity occasionally erupts. When Cossack and peasant uprisings occur in the 17th century, particularly the catastrophic Khmelnytsky uprising of 1648 to 1649, Jewish communities suffer terribly. Rebels massacre Jews as representatives of the Polish nobility and Catholic oppression. Entire communities are destroyed. But that catastrophe lies beyond the medieval period we are examining. In the 14th and 15th centuries, Poland represents opportunity and relative safety for Jewish refugees from Western Europe. The migration also creates new connections between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewry. Some refugees from the Iberian expulsion settle in Poland, alongside Ashkenazi Jews. Italian Jewish merchants trade with Polish Jews. Ottoman Jewish scholars correspond with Polish rabbis. These connections create greater Jewish unity, even as geographic distance separates communities. The shared experience of persecution, the common texts and traditions, and the networks of communication create a sense of global Jewish peoplehood, despite vast distances and cultural differences. Poland also serves as a transit point for some Jews moving further east. Some communities settle in Ottoman territories, where Turkish sultans welcome Jewish refugees, recognizing their commercial skills and manufacturing knowledge. The Ottoman Empire in the 15th and 16th centuries becomes another major center of Jewish settlement, particularly for Sephardic refugees from Iberia. The coexistence of Ashkenazi communities in Poland and Sephardic communities in the Ottoman Empire creates two major centers of Jewish life that maintain distinct customs and traditions while recognizing shared peoplehood. The Polish haven allows Jewish communities to do more than merely survive. They flourish. The population grows through both immigration and natural increase. Economic activity expands and diversifies. Cultural institutions develop sophistication. Yet the success carries a troubling dependency. Polish Jewry as prosperity depends on the continuing tolerance and protection of the Polish nobility. When that protection eventually fails in later centuries, the consequences will be catastrophic. But in the medieval period, Poland represents the greatest success of Jewish survival strategies, a place where refugees rebuild not just communities, but an entire civilization. The candles flicker in a small room in Constantinople in 1493. A family recently arrived from Spain gathers for their first Sabbath in exile. The parents are middle-aged, their faces marked by the trauma of expulsion and the hardship of the journey. Their children, bewildered by the strange new city and the foreign language, huddle close. They have lost their home, their property, much of their community, but they have kept the candlesticks, carried in their limited baggage. As the mother lights candles and recites the blessing, her voice cracks with emotion. But she completes the blessing. The family sings Leka Dodi, welcoming the Sabbath bride. For this moment, in this room, the world is familiar. The ritual connects them to the community they left behind, to ancestors who performed these same actions across centuries, and to Jews performing identical rituals at this moment across the world. The expulsion has taken much, but it has not taken this: the ability to create Jewish time, Jewish space, and Jewish community, even in exile. This scene, repeated in countless variations across the medieval centuries, encapsulates how Jewish communities survived the Middle Ages. They survived through portable traditions that required no temple, no homeland, no political power. They survived through texts preserved in memory and recopied when destroyed. They survived through institutions recreated in new locations when old ones were demolished. They survived through networks spanning continents, allowing refugees to find help in distant cities. They survived through adaptability that allowed economic and social adjustment to changing circumstances while maintaining core identity. They survived through the stubborn determination of ordinary people to remain Jewish, despite every pressure and inducement to convert. The 1,000 years from 800 to 1500 transformed European Jewish life repeatedly. The relatively secure commercial position of Carolingian Jews gave way to increasing restrictions and persecution in the High Middle Ages. The Crusades inaugurated centuries of sporadic violence culminating in the Black Death catastrophes. The concentration in money lending and financial activities created both opportunity and vulnerability. The development of sophisticated intellectual traditions in both Ashkenazi and Sephardi communities produced lasting cultural achievements. The expulsion from Western European territories drove eastward migration that reshaped Jewish geography. The rise of Polish and Ottoman Jewry created new centers that would dominate Jewish life for centuries. Yet certain patterns persisted beneath this turbulence. Jews remained a distinct religious and cultural community, maintaining practices and beliefs that set them apart from Christian majorities. They continued to study sacred texts, observe dietary laws, celebrate distinctive holidays, and transmit traditions to the next generation. They maintained kehillah structures providing governance, charity, education, and mutual support. They created economic niches, allowing survival despite restrictions. They developed theological frameworks, providing meaning for suffering and hope for redemption. And they demonstrated remarkable resilience, rebuilding after each catastrophe and continuing their cultural creativity despite persecution. The survival strategies we have examined: adaptability, institutional portability, educational emphasis, geographic networks, economic diversification, collective responsibility, theological meaning-making, historical memory, and refusal of assimilation, were not consciously designed as a coordinated plan. They emerged organically from Jewish tradition, circumstance, and countless individual and communal decisions. Some strategies have precedence in ancient Jewish experience. Others developed specifically in medieval conditions. Together, they created a survival system without being a system, decentralized, adaptive, and remarkably effective. But survival came at terrible cost. The death toll from crusades, expulsions, blood libel accusations, and Black Death massacres likely exceeds hundreds of thousands over the medieval centuries. Entire communities were obliterated. Families were torn apart by death, conversion, and migration. Property accumulated over generations was lost in moments. The psychological trauma of constant vulnerability, periodic violence, and chronic insecurity marked individuals and communities. The need to maintain constant vigilance against danger, to pay protection money to capricious authorities, to accept humiliating restrictions, and to live as perpetual outsiders in the lands they inhabited created profound suffering. The moral complexity of Jewish economic life also demands acknowledgement. The concentration in moneylending, while forced by restrictions on other occupations, created genuine ethical dilemmas. Jewish creditors did charge interest, sometimes at high rates, to desperate Christians. Jewish tax farmers did collect oppressive levies on behalf of exploitative nobles. Jewish tavern keepers did sell alcohol to peasants. These activities, while legal and economically rational, contributed to negative perceptions and resentment. The fact that Jews had limited alternatives, the Christians created the demand for these services, and that economic activities were not inherently immoral, does not erase the complexity and the role these activities played in generating hostility. The internal tensions within Jewish communities also deserve recognition. Medieval Jewish society was not egalitarian or democratic. Wealthy elites dominated kehillah governance. Learned rabbis wielded significant authority. Women faced systematic exclusion from formal education and leadership. The poor often struggled while the wealthy flourished. Converts who sought to return to Judaism faced suspicion. Intellectual dissidents who questioned accepted beliefs or practices faced communal sanctions. The solidarity essential for survival required conformity and could be oppressive. The survival of the community sometimes came at the cost of individual autonomy. Yet acknowledging these costs and complexities does not diminish the remarkable achievement of survival. Medieval Jewish communities maintained cultural continuity across centuries of disruption. They produced intellectual and artistic works of lasting value. They created communities where individuals found meaning, belonging, and support. They raised children with hope despite bleak circumstances. They maintained ethical standards and mutual obligations even under pressure. They demonstrated that a minority population, without political power or military force, could persist through cultural strength and communal organization. The question of modern relevance naturally arises. What can contemporary societies learn from medieval Jewish survival? Several lessons suggest themselves. First, that minority communities can maintain distinct identities over long periods without full assimilation if they develop strong institutions and cultural practices. Second, that persecution, while damaging, need not destroy a determined community. Third, that cultural vitality and creativity can flourish even in adverse circumstances. Fourth, that education and literacy provide crucial resources for cultural transmission. Fifth, that diaspora and dispersal, while painful, can provide resilience through geographic diversity. Sixth, that economic adaptability enables survival despite restrictions. And finally, that meaning-making frameworks, religious, philosophical, or cultural help communities endure suffering. But medieval Jewish history also teaches cautionary lessons. It demonstrates the fragility of tolerance and how quickly acceptance can turn to violence. It shows that economic success can breed resentment and become grounds for persecution. It reveals that legal protections mean little without the political will and capacity to enforce them. It illustrates that scapegoating minorities during crises is a persistent human tendency. It proves that conspiracy theories and blood libels, however absurd, can gain wide acceptance and deadly consequences. And it demonstrates that the price of survival can be immense, even when survival succeeds. For contemporary Jewish communities, medieval history remains deeply significant. The text created then biblical commentaries, legal codes, philosophical works, mystical literature, poetry, and chronicles continued to shape Jewish thought and practice. The institutions developed then inform contemporary Jewish organizational patterns. The commemorations established then remain part of the liturgical calendar. The memories of persecution then influence modern Jewish consciousness and political perspectives. Medieval Jewish history is not dead past, but living tradition continually reinterpreted for new circumstances. For non-Jewish readers, medieval Jewish history offers a window into an often overlooked dimension of European history. Jews were not peripheral to medieval society, but integrally involved in its economic, intellectual, and cultural life, however marginalized they were politically. Jewish experiences illuminate broader patterns of religious intolerance, minority persecution, and cultural resilience. The history challenges simple narratives about the Middle Ages, revealing complexity, variation across time and place, and a coexistence of persecution with moments of tolerance and cultural achievement. The study of medieval Jewish survival also raises profound questions about human society. Why do groups persecute minorities? What enables some communities to survive persecution while others disappear? How do people maintain hope and meaning in apparently hopeless circumstances? What is the relationship between suffering and creativity? How do societies balance diversity with cohesion? What obligations do majorities owe minorities? These questions, urgent in the medieval period, remain urgent today in a world still marked by ethnic and religious conflict, refugee crises, and the challenges of building pluralistic societies. As we conclude this examination of how Jewish communities survived the Middle Ages, we return to the fundamental paradox with which we began. A people without land, army, or political power maintained identity and culture for 1,000 years of persecution. The survival was never certain, never guaranteed, never without cost. It required extraordinary effort, countless sacrifices, and adaptations that transformed Jewish life while maintaining continuity. It succeeded not because of any single factor, but through the interaction of internal communal resources with external historical circumstances, and the cumulative effect of millions of individual choices to remain Jewish despite every pressure to abandon that identity. The candles flickering in that Constantinople room in 1493 symbolize both loss and continuity. The family has lost much, but the light continues. The tradition that began at Sinai, but survived Babylonian exile and Roman destruction, that persisted through medieval persecution, continues. The same blessings said by their ancestors echo in their voices. The same hope for redemption that sustained previous generations sustains them, and the determination to transmit this tradition to the next generation, to ensure that the candles will be lit next week and next year, remains unshaken. This determination, repeated across centuries and continents, is ultimately how Jewish communities survived the Middle Ages, not through any single strategy or brilliant plan, but through the persistent refusal to disappear, the stubborn insistence on remaining themselves, and the faith that survival, meaning, and even redemption remain possible even in the darkest times. The medieval Jewish story is ultimately a human story about resilience, identity, and a capacity to maintain culture and community against overwhelming odds. It is a story of tragedy and triumph, of suffering and creativity, of destruction and rebuilding. It is a story that continues beyond the medieval period into modernity, as Jewish communities face new challenges and opportunities. And it is a story with lessons for all who seek to understand how human communities persist, adapt, and survive through times of trial. The candles, once lit in Spain, flicker now in new lands, carried by new hands, but maintaining the same light that has illuminated Jewish homes for millennia. That persistence of light through darkness is, in the end, the answer to how Jewish communities survived the Middle Ages.